So several years ago, I went to an amateur radio flea market, and there was this pathetic-looking Heathkit Mohican. The cabinet was all rusted and pitted. The knobs looked like they were all pitted. This was a radio that I used to dream about as a kid, looking at the Heathkit catalog back in the 60s. So I did some restoration work. So let's have a look at the results. Apart from the cabinet being in rough shape, the circuit board was as well. Apparently somebody who knew nothing about electronics decided they were going to customize it, and as a result it was non-functional. So online I went, downloaded the manual complete with the schematic, went through the whole thing, and got it functional. Looking at the rear panel, there's a battery pack, an antenna terminal, a muting terminal for when you're using it with a transmitter to mute the receiver during transmit, and there's also a headphone jack. When I first got this receiver back, this S meter was missing. The knobs were rather pitted. But in general, the front panel, there's some scratches here and there. But in general, it was fairly good shape. As mentioned earlier, the cabinet was in pretty rough shape, so it took a lot of grinding and sanding, and several coats of Hunter's Green lacquer paint. That, by the way, in the top left corner is the speaker opening. The S meter was completely missing when I got the radio, so I replaced it with an S meter and transmitter power meter that came out of a CB set. It's not accurate, and depends on whether you have AVC, or automatic volume control, on or off, as to whether or not it functions. And it doesn't function particularly well in single sideband, but at least it's a relative indication. The battery pack is removed from the radio with two nuts on the back. Now this could be an optional AC power supply, but this particular radio came with a battery pack. And inside the battery pack are 8 C cells. And these C cells are arranged in 2 rows of 4 each. And there's a connector on the end for removing it from the radio completely. The radio has 5 bands. Well, the first one is for AM or medium wave. And the second one goes from 1.6 to 4 megahertz. The third one goes from 4 megahertz to 9 megahertz. The fourth one goes from 9 megahertz to 20 megahertz. And the top one goes from 20 megahertz to about 32 megahertz. Each of the ham bands has a band spread section. There's 80 meters, 40 meters, 15, 20, and 10 meters. And that's controlled by this band spread dial down here. And in order to use that, you have to first set the main dial to one of these markings, as you can see here. Each one of the bands has special markings. So for instance, on 40 meters, we'd set it to that point, and then we can tune down here using this dial, the band spread dial, and that will give us reasonably accurate frequency readout. Let's take a look at some of the other controls. There's a dial light, which is a momentary switch, lights up 2 bulbs at the end of the dial. And you also have an antenna tuning control, which basically tries to get a match with the antenna impedance, an RF gain control, and a band selector. On this side you've got an AVC control, which is otherwise called an AGC control. So that's for when you have strong AM stations coming through. This is the main tuning dial for the upper part of the dial. There's a volume control, of course, automatic noise limiter, which seems to do very little other than just kill the gain. And you have a BFO control, which is a push it in. It's an AM detector. Pull it out. It actually has a BFO. or beat frequency oscillator.
Maybe a little better than that, and we've probably got an inch of snow on the ground, so it's not real pretty. I'm not very excited about it.
I hope you enjoyed this brief look at the Heathkit Mohican. If you did, please subscribe, hit that notify bell so you won't miss any future videos that I plan to put on this channel on vintage shortwave radios. Thanks for watching.